At a family lunch, my granddaughter hands me a note. Call the police. What seemed like an ordinary moment turns into a frightening revelation. Something was happening, and my granddaughter knew, but no one else seemed to notice. What happened? Next, we'll shake everything you think about family, trust, and betrayal. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The morning sun streamed through the white lace curtains, gently illuminating the impeccably organized living room. Martha adjusted the final details of the fresh flower arrangement. She had picked from the garden, her hand still steady at 66, demonstrating the same meticulous care as always. The house breathed order and comfort, each object in its proper place reflecting a life built with dedication and love. Arthur, her husband, read the newspaper in his favorite armchair while drinking the coffee she had prepared with her usual care. The morning routine followed the same ritual of decades, a silent ballet of familiar gestures that brought comfort and security to the couple. Martha smiled as she observed him, noticing how his grey hair shone in the natural light, thinking about how fortunate they were to have built such a harmonious life together. The doorbell interrupted her contemplative thoughts. Through the window, she spotted her son Richard's car parked on the sidewalk, and beside it, her daughter-in-law Patricia, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. An unexpected visit in the middle of the morning was unusual, especially on a weekday, when both should be working at their respective jobs in the city. "Good morning, Mom." Richard hugged Martha with an enthusiasm that seemed slightly forced. "We hope you don't mind our surprise visit. We need to talk to you about something important." Patricia followed behind, a polite smile on her lips carrying an expression that Martha couldn't completely decipher. There was something different in the air, an almost imperceptible tension that the experienced mother immediately picked up on, even without being able to identify its specific origin. "Of course I don't mind, dears. You know this house always has its doors open for you." Martha led the couple to the living room, where Arthur had folded his newspaper and stood up to greet the visitors. "I'll prepare some fresh coffee. I imagine you have something important to tell us." While preparing the drink in the kitchen, Martha could hear fragments of the conversation unfolding in the living room. The voices whispered in low, serious tones, creating an atmosphere of conspiracy that made her increasingly uneasy. Something was definitely happening, and the feeling in her stomach told her it wasn't good news. Upon returning with the coffee tray, she found the three seated in positions that seemed rehearsed. Richard was leaning forward, hands intertwined, while Patricia maintained an erect and formal posture. Arthur seemed confused, alternating his gaze between his son and daughter-in-law as if trying to understand something that hadn't been fully explained. "Mum, please sit down." Richard gestured toward her favorite armchair. "Patricia and I have been talking a lot about you two lately, and we've reached an important conclusion. We're concerned about the fact that you continue to live here alone." Martha served the coffee slowly, each movement deliberate as she processed her son's words. His concern seemed genuine, but there was something in his voice that didn't sound completely natural, as if he were following a previously established script. "Concerned about what, son?" Arthur was the first to verbalize the question that hung in the air. "Your mother and I are doing very well. The house is always clean, the garden is blooming, our medical appointments are up to date. I don't see any reason for concern." Patricia coughed delicately, a sound that seemed to signal it was her turn to speak. "Father-in-law, with all due respect, you're getting older. This house is very big, requires a lot of maintenance, many responsibilities. Wouldn't it be more comfortable for you to live in a smaller place, more suitable for people your age?" The words hit Martha like invisible little needles. People their age? She had woken up early, tended to the garden, prepared a complete breakfast, and organized the entire house before 8 o'clock. Her body was healthy, her mind alert, her hands capable. Why was her own family suddenly treating her as if she were an invalid? "Besides," Richard continued, his voice gaining a more assertive tone, "this property is worth a considerable amount in the current market. You could sell it for an excellent price, invest the money more intelligently, and still have a substantial amount left to live comfortably in a smaller apartment." Martha felt the world spinning slightly around her. Sell the house, The house where she had raised her children, where every brick contained a memory, where every corner held pieces of her life story. The house that she and Arthur had literally built, with their own hands, saving every penny over decades. Of course, we understand that this decision may seem drastic initially, Patricia added, her voice taking on an almost maternal tone. But think about it. You wouldn't have to worry about repairs, maintenance, gardening anymore. You could enjoy your golden years without these heavy responsibilities. Arthur frowned, clearly disturbed by the suggestion. Richard, this house isn't just our home. It's our heritage, our history, our legacy for you and our granddaughter. Why do you want us to get rid of it now? Dad, don't see it as getting rid of it. See it as an advance on your inheritance. Richard smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. This way you can enjoy the money while you're alive, and we can make sure you're living properly and safely. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Martha could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of traffic. On the street, even her own breathing that had become more shallow. Something was wrong with this situation, something that her intuition as an experienced mother and wife could detect, even if her reason still couldn't articulate exactly what it was. We need to think about this, Martha finally spoke, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. It's a very important decision that will affect the rest of our lives. It's not something we can decide in one morning. Of course, Mom. There's no rush. Patricia stood up, smoothing her skirt. But don't take too long to decide either. The real estate market is favorable now, and this opportunity may not last forever. After the couple left, Martha and Arthur remained seated in silence for long minutes. The house, which minutes before had seemed like a cozy refuge, now seemed to echo with the words that had been spoken, as if the walls themselves were questioning their right to continue being their home. Martha, did you feel something strange about the conversation? Arthur broke the silence, his voice laden with concern. Yes, Arthur, something wasn't right. Martha looked around the room, observing every detail she had cared for with so much love over the years. They spoke as if we were no longer capable of taking care of ourselves, as if we were sick or incapacitated. And this story about advancing the inheritance, Arthur shook his head. They never talked to us about financial difficulties. Why would they suddenly need this money? Martha stood up and walked to the window, observing the garden she had cultivated with such care. The flowers were vibrant, the flower beds perfectly aligned, each plant healthy and well tended. How could anyone look at that and say she wasn't capable of taking care of her own home? An unsettling feeling began to form in her chest, a suspicion that she still didn't want to name. But something told her that this conversation hadn't been the first, nor would it be the last. And that behind that seemingly genuine concern, there was something much darker hiding between the lines of her own son's kind words. In the days following that unsettling conversation, Martha's life began to take on different tones. The phone, calls from Richard and Patricia became more frequent, always with the same subject hovering around seemingly casual conversations. A question about how the kitchen faucet leak was doing would transform into an observation about the difficulties of maintaining a large house. Her comment about the weather would convert into a suggestion about how much easier it would be not to have to worry about the garden during rainy seasons. Martha began to notice a pattern in these subtle advances, a persistence that masqueraded as filial care but carried a constant and unsettling pressure. Each conversation seemed to have the ultimate goal of convincing her that she and Arthur were no longer fit to maintain that house, that life they had built with so much love and dedication. Mom, don't you think you're overdoing it a bit? Richard's voice sounded over the phone on a Thursday morning. Patricia told me you spent the entire morning weeding the garden yesterday. Isn't it dangerous for someone your age to do that kind of physical effort? Richard, I'm 66, not 96. Martha held the phone with one hand while arranging the sofa cushions with the other. Weeding the garden is something I've done for decades. It keeps my body active and my mind occupied. I know, Mom, but... The pause in her son's voice was laden with a concern that seemed excessive for the situation. Patricia and I have been researching some senior residences in the region. They're very beautiful places with gardens cared for, by professionals, organized activities, regular medical monitoring. Martha felt her blood freeze in her veins. Senior residences, when had they gone from selling the house to institutionalizing her? The escalation of the situation was happening more quickly than she had anticipated, and each new suggestion seemed more invasive than the previous one. "My son, your father and I are perfectly fine here. We don't need regular medical monitoring beyond our normal consultations, and we certainly don't need other people to take care of our garden." The firmness in her voice surprised even herself. This conversation is going too far. Mom, don't get upset. It's exactly this irritability that worries us. Richard's voice took on an almost professorial tone. People in the aging process sometimes develop resistance to changes that could be beneficial for them. It's a known behavioral pattern. The phone line went silent for a few tense seconds. Martha felt as if she were looking at her son through a foggy glass, recognizing his voice, but unable to identify the person behind those words. When had he become an expert on aging? And why was he speaking to her as if she were a patient instead of his mother? "Richard, I'm going to hang up now. When you want to talk to me as a son and not as if I were a problematic patient, you can call me again." After hanging up the phone, Martha sat in the living room armchair and let the tears flow freely down her face. The confusion in her heart was immense. How had the boy she had cradled in her arms, whom she had taught to ride a bicycle, whom she had consoled during nightmares, now speak to her as if she were a stranger, incapable of making her own decisions? Arthur found her in this state when he returned from his morning walk. Without needing explanations, he sat beside her and held her hand, offering the silent comfort that only decades of companionship can provide. "They called again?" His question was soft but laden with concern. "Now they're talking about senior residences, Arthur, as if we were senescent people who had lost the ability to discern." Martha wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "I can't understand what's happening to them." That afternoon, as if the universe were orchestrating a sequence of events, Patricia appeared at the door with her granddaughter Sophie, 15 years old. The girl, who had always been a source of joy in Martha's life, seemed strangely quiet and uncomfortable. "I brought Sophie to visit you." Patricia smiled, but there was something mechanical about that smile. "She has some questions for a school project about family history. I thought you could help her." Sophie hugged her grandparents with her usual affection, but Martha noticed that the girl avoided prolonging eye contact. Throughout the visit, the teenager seemed to be fighting against some internal discomfort, answering her grandparents' questions monosyllabically and constantly looking at her mother, as if expecting some kind of guidance or approval. "Sophie, dear, are you okay?" Martha approached her granddaughter when Patricia excused herself to take a phone call. "You seem worried about something." The girl raised her eyes quickly, and Martha could see tears forming. "Grandma, Sophie began to speak, but was interrupted by Patricia's return to the room. "Sophie, let's go. We've already taken up too much of your grandparents' time." Patricia held her daughter's arm with a firmness that seemed excessive for the situation. "I'm sure they have many things to do." After the two left, Martha was left with an even more unsettling feeling. There was something going on with her granddaughter, something that was being prevented from being expressed. The girl clearly wanted to tell her something, but was being silenced by her own mother. That night, during dinner, Martha decided to share her observations with Arthur. "Did you notice how different Sophie was today, and how Patricia seemed to be controlling her every movement?" "I did notice. The girl seemed to be carrying a weight on her back." Arthur chewed thoughtfully. "And Patricia, since that first conversation about selling the house, she has been acting very strangely with us. You know what else bothers me?" Martha put her fork down on her plate. "The way they talk to us now, as if we were big children who need to be led by the hand. Richard had never questioned my ability to take care of the house, had never suggested that I was incapable of making decisions. And this whole story started out of nowhere." Arthur shook his head. "There was no incident, no problem that would justify this sudden concern." Martha looked out the kitchen window, observing the neighborhood lights that were turning on with the arrival of night. A strange sensation was growing in her chest, an intuition that she couldn't completely name, but which told her that there was much more happening than appeared on the surface. "Arthur, do you think it's possible that—" She hesitated, fearing to verbalize the thought that had been hovering in her mind. "Do you think it's possible that they have some hidden motive for wanting us to sell the house?" "What kind of hidden motive?" "I don't know exactly, but their insistence, the way they're trying to convince us that we're incapable—" Martha paused, organizing her thoughts. "What if it's not really about our well-being? What if it's about something completely different?" The silence that followed was laden with unmentioned possibilities. Both knew they were entering dangerous territory, questioning the motivations of their own family members. But the sequence of events of the last few weeks had planted seeds of doubt that were difficult to ignore. As they washed the dishes together, Martha made a decision. "I'm going to pay more attention to the details of their next visits. Something isn't right, and I need to find out what it is before it's too late." Arthur looked at her with admiration and concern. "Just promise we'll face this together, whatever we discover." "I promise." Martha squeezed her husband's hand, "but something tells me that our tranquility is about to be tested in ways we still can't imagine." Sunday arrived with an unexpected invitation from Patricia for a family lunch. The call had been made the previous morning, with an urgency disguised as spontaneity that made Martha immediately suspicious. "I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk more about your future," her daughter-in-law had said, her voice laden with a sweetness that seemed too forced. Martha got ready with her usual care, but a feeling of apprehension accompanied every gesture. Arthur beside her adjusted his tie in the bedroom mirror, his movements also revealing a tension he couldn't completely disguise. "Do you think we should go?" he asked for the third time that morning. "Yes, we need to go, but let's stay alert to everything, Arthur. Every word, every gesture, every detail." Martha picked up her purse and checked if she had brought the small recorder she had discreetly purchased the previous week. An inexplicable intuition had led her to make that purchase, as if an inner voice was telling her she would need evidence of what was about to happen. Richard and Patricia's house was impeccably decorated, as always, but there was a different energy in the air when Martha and Arthur arrived. Sophie was in the living room, seated on the sofa with a book in her lap, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes were fixed on the page, but Martha could tell that the girl's mind was somewhere else entirely. "Grandma, Grandpa!" Sophie stood up quickly, approaching to hug them, but again Martha noticed that furtive look, as if her granddaughter was constantly checking if she was being observed by her mother. "How's my dear granddaughter?" Martha held the girl's face between her hands, studying her expression. "You seem worried." "I'm fine, Grandma." Sophie forced a smile, but her eyes told a different story. It's just that I have a lot of homework to do after lunch." Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a floral apron. "Sophie, dear, can you help your father set the table? Lunch is almost ready." During the preparations, Martha carefully observed the family dynamics. Richard was more talkative than normal, telling stories from work with an enthusiasm that seemed exaggerated. Patricia moved through the kitchen efficiently, but there was a rigidity in her movements that didn't go unnoticed by Martha's trained eye. "Mom, sit here." Richard pulled out a chair at the head of the table. "We prepared your favorite dish." Lunch proceeded with seemingly normal conversations about work, school, and vacation plans, but Martha noticed that whenever she or Arthur picked up their water glasses, Patricia observed them attentively, as if awaiting some specific reaction. It was when Martha took her first sip of water that she noticed something strange. The liquid had a slightly bitter taste, almost imperceptible, but definitely different from the water she was used to drinking. She disguised her reaction, continuing to converse normally, but her mind was on high alert. "This water has a strange taste," she commented casually. "Oh, it must be the new filter we installed." Patricia responded quickly, perhaps too quickly. "It's still adapting to the system. Would you like me to bring water from the tap?" "No need, thank you." Martha smiled, but mentally made a note about her daughter-in-law's ready response. Throughout lunch, she pretended to drink the water, but in reality only wetted her lips. Arthur, following her silent example, also avoided consuming the drink. Sophie, she noticed, didn't have a water glass in front of her, only orange juice. After lunch, while the adults settled in the living room for coffee, Sophie approached Martha with the excuse of showing her a book. When the girl sat next to her grandmother, Martha felt something being discreetly pressed into her hand. It was a small piece of paper, folded several times. "Grandma, you need to read this book." Sophie spoke loudly enough for her parents to hear. "It talks about medicinal plants. I thought you would like it because of your garden." Martha immediately understood that this was a disguise. She discreetly put the paper in her purse, promising herself she would read it as soon as she got home. "Thank you, dear. I'll definitely read it." The rest of the afternoon passed in an almost palpable tension. Richard and Patricia returned to the subject of the house, this time with a different approach. They had researched some apartments and residences that would be perfect for people in Martha and Arthur's situation. "We've even scheduled a visit for you to see a wonderful place next week," Richard smiled enthusiastically. "It's a luxury residence for seniors. It has doctors on site, nurses, recreational activities. And the best part," Patricia added, "is that you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. All meals are prepared by nutritionists, all medications are administered correctly, there's regular medical monitoring." "Medications?" Arthur frowned. "We don't take regular medications beyond basic vitamins." "Dad, people your age always develop specific medical needs." Richard again took on that professorial tone that bothered Martha so much. "It's better to be prepared before problems appear." Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something sinister in the way they talked about medications, as if they were already anticipating that she and Arthur would need treatments they didn't yet require. On the way back home, the silence inside the car was heavy with unverbalized concerns. It was only when they arrived at the safety of their own living room that Martha finally retrieved the paper that Sophie had given her. With trembling hands, she unfolded the small note. Sophie's handwriting, still juvenile but clearly legible, contained a message that made Martha's world stop spinning. "Grandma, they're putting something in your water. I saw Mum doing it before you arrived. I can't say anything because they forbade me from telling, but you need to know. Please be careful. I love you. Sophie." Arthur, who had read the note over Martha's shoulder, went pale. "My God, Martha. What does this mean?" "It means our suspicions were right," Martha's voice came out as a whisper. "They really are doing something to us. Something terrible." That night, Martha couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, going over every moment of the lunch, every facial expression, every word spoken. The bitter taste of the water was etched in her memory, as was Sophie's worried look and Patricia's evasive answers. The next morning, she made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. She took the glass she had discreetly taken from Richard's house, she had stored it in her purse before leaving, and decided to take it for analysis. "Arthur, we need to know what they were putting in that water." She showed the glass to her husband. "I'm going to take this to a laboratory today. Do you think that's safe? What if they discover we're investigating?" "It doesn't matter anymore if they find out or not. Our granddaughter is trying to protect us, risking her own safety to warn us." Martha held her husband's hands. "We can't ignore this alert. We need to discover the truth, whatever it costs." As she prepared to leave, Martha felt a mixture of fear and determination. Her intuition as a mother and grandmother told her she was about to discover something that would change her perception of her own family forever. But she also knew there was no turning back. The truth, whatever it might be, needed to come to light. What she still didn't imagine was that the results of that examination would be even more shocking than her worst fears had anticipated. The 3 days of waiting for the laboratory results were the longest in Martha's life. Every phone call from Richard or Patricia made her shudder. Every time she looked at Arthur, she saw the reflection of her own anguish in her husband's eyes. The house, which had always been her refuge, now seemed haunted by the terrible possibilities that her mind couldn't stop imagining. When the call from the laboratory finally came, Martha was watering her morning flowers. The technician's voice was professional, but laden with a seriousness that made her heart race. "Mrs. Martha, the results of the analysis of the sample you brought are ready. Would it be possible for you to come to the laboratory today to talk?" "In person? Is it something serious?" She could barely formulate the question. "I prefer we talk in person, ma'am. When would be convenient for you?" 2 hours later, seated in front of the laboratory technician, Martha heard the words that confirmed her worst fears. In the water that had been served at her son's house, the presence of lorazepam was detected, a controlled medication used for anxiety and sleep disorders, but which in inadequate doses could cause mental confusion, memory loss, and disorientation. This medication, administered regularly to a person without a medical prescription, can simulate symptoms of dementia or cognitive deterioration. The technician explained, while Martha felt the world spinning around her. It's a substance frequently used in cases of psychological abuse, especially against the elderly. Martha returned home with shaky legs and a broken heart. The scientific confirmation of what her intuition already knew was devastating, but also liberating. Now she had certainty, had proof, had the truth in her hands. "They were drugging us, Arthur." She showed the results to her husband. "Our own son was trying to make us appear mentally incapable." Arthur held the papers with trembling hands, reading and rereading the results as if hoping the words would magically change. "But why, Martha? Why would our son do such a thing to us?" The answer came 3 days later, when Richard and Patricia appeared again for a routine visit. This time Martha was prepared. The small recorder was hidden among the sofa cushions, ready to capture any confession that might emerge. "Mom, you look great today." Patricia smiled, but Martha could perceive an evaluative look in her eyes. "How do you feel?" "I'm fine, thank you." Martha served the coffee she had prepared, observing every movement of the visitors. "By the way, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation last week." Richard leaned forward, interested. "About moving house?" "Exactly. And I must confess that I've started to get really worried about myself." Martha assumed a worried expression. "That was completely false. I've been experiencing some episodes of mental confusion lately. Sometimes I forget where I put things, or I get a bit disoriented." The look that Richard and Patricia exchanged didn't go unnoticed. There was satisfaction there, a sinister satisfaction that made Martha's stomach turn. "Mum, it's good that you're recognizing this." Richard's voice took on an almost triumphant tone. "That's exactly what we were trying to show you. These are clear signs that you need professional help." "And the good news," Patricia added, "is that we've already spoken with a specialist in geriatrics. He said he can do a complete evaluation and, if necessary, attest to the need for specialized care." Martha feigned concern. "Attest to the need? Does that mean I could be considered incapable of taking care of myself?" "Well, if that's the case, it would be for your own good." Richard placed his hand on his mother's shoulder in a way that should have seemed affectionate, but felt cold and calculating. "This way we could assume legal responsibility for your assets and decisions, ensuring that you receive the best possible care." "And the house?" Martha asked the question she knew. They were waiting for. "The house would be sold, of course. The money would be used entirely to fund your treatment and care." Patricia spoke too quickly, revealing the enthusiasm she was trying to disguise. "Don't worry about that. We would take care of all the bureaucratic details for you." At that moment, a small figure appeared in the doorway of the living room. Sophie was standing there, obviously having heard the conversation, with tears running down her face. "I can't believe you're doing this to Grandma," the girl's voice came out as a muffled cry. "I told her about the medicine in the water. Anna knows everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and Patricia were petrified, looking from their daughter to Martha, as if trying to process what had just happened. "What medicine?" Richard tried to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed nervousness. "Sophie, you're making things up." "I'm not making anything up." Sophie approached Martha, standing next to her grandmother like a protective shield. "I saw Mom putting pills in Grandma's water last Sunday, and I heard you talking about how to make her seem mentally ill so you could get her house." Martha rose slowly, her posture assuming a dignity that had nothing confused or deteriorated about it. "So it's true. You really were drugging me." The mask of filial concern finally fell from Richard and Patricia's faces. What remained was an expression of desperation and anger that Martha had never seen in her son. "Mom, you don't understand." Richard tried one last manipulative approach. "This house is worth more than $500,000. You're going to end up spending it all on medicines and medical care when you really get sick. It's better to sell now and ensure that something is left." "For you, you mean?" Arthur's voice cut through the air like a blade. He had entered the room silently and had heard everything. "This is all about money. About our inheritance. Dad, don't be dramatic. It's an investment in all our futures." Patricia tried to regain control of the situation, including Sophie's. This house could pay for her college. "I don't want anything that comes from hurting my grandparents," Sophie shouted, her voice laden with a maturity that didn't match her 15 years. "You are horrible people." Martha pulled her granddaughter close, protecting her from the fury she saw growing in Patricia's eyes. "Sophie, thank you for being brave enough to tell me the truth. You saved my life." "Enough drama." Richard stood up abruptly. "Mom, you're going to do this medical evaluation, whether you want to or not. And if you don't want to cooperate, we'll find other legal ways to prove that you no longer have the capacity to make decisions." "That won't be necessary." Martha walked to the sideboard and retrieved the small recorder. "Because everything you just said is recorded here, including the confession about the medication in the water." The shock on Richard and Patricia's faces would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. They had been completely fooled by their own mother, who had revealed herself to be much smarter and more prepared than they had imagined. "Besides," Martha continued, "I already took a sample of the water you served me for laboratory analysis. I have the results here with me." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Martha opened the door to find 2 police officers she had called before Richard and Patricia's arrival. "Mrs. Martha, we received your complaint about elder abuse and administration of controlled substances without a medical prescription." What followed was a whirlwind of legal procedures, testimonies, and tears. Richard and Patricia were detained to provide clarification, denying everything until the moment they were confronted with the irrefutable evidence that Martha had collected. 6 months later, sitting in her garden next to Sophie, who now lived with her and Arthur, Martha reflected on everything that had happened. The legal process had resulted in the conviction of Richard and Patricia for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and administration of controlled substances. A corrupt doctor who had agreed to provide a false diagnosis of dementia was also implicated in the scheme. "Grandma, don't you miss them?" Sophie asked, pointing to an old family photo that Martha had kept in a drawer. "I miss the son I raised, Sophie, but that person who tried to harm me, that one I don't know." Martha held her granddaughter's hand. "What matters is that now we have a new family, a family based on true love, not greed." Sophie smiled, a smile that no longer carried the weight of the secrets she had been forced to keep. "And what an incredible family we are." Arthur approached the two, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. "And how about we celebrate our incredible family with a snack in the garden?" As they had tea together, observing the garden that Martha continued to care for with the same love as always, she realized she had discovered something fundamental about life. Sometimes, the people we love can disappoint us in ways we never imagined possible, but we also discover that we are stronger than we thought, and that true love always finds a way to prevail. You know what else? Martha looked at Sophie and Arthur. "I started a support group for other victims of family abuse. If my experience can help other people not go through what I went through, then all this pain was worth it." "Grandma, you're a heroine." Sophie hugged her grandmother tightly. "No, my dear, I'm just a woman who learned that the truth, even when it hurts, is always better than a lie. and that we should never underestimate our own strength. As the sun set over the garden that continued to flourish under her care, Martha smiled. Her house was still her house, her life was still her life, and her family, the true family, was complete around her. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when we fight not just for ourselves, but for those we truly love. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Martha, Sophie, and the courage of a family that united against adversity has touched you deeply. This narrative shows us that age should never be seen as synonymous with fragility, and that true love always finds ways to protect itself and prevail. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging and touching stories. Find it by clicking here beside. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of life and the strength of the human spirit. Don't miss our upcoming content and tell us in the